All right, so now we're going to turn to Bacon's Rebellion. A rebellion you may not have heard much about, but I think is significant in terms of what many historians believe is the actual significance of this rebellion on American history. And you're going to see some of these other rebellions, like Shays' Rebellion, which we'll talk about later, that I think are often mentioned in little footnotes. Oh, this was important. It made an influence on X, Y, and Z. Anyways, so that's all, and then they move on. So this is another one of those. You will read more about the details in the Howard Zinn book, and this will be up for discussion also on the for the discussion board and the chat board. In any case, what was Bacon's Rebellion about? It was essentially an armed rebellion about a century before 1776, before there was another big rebellion, right, against the British. So essentially, it was against the Virginia colonial governor Sir William Berkeley, and it was the first, at least recorded, rebellion in the American colonies. The colonies here in America, to clarify, right? And it was so powerful that British authorities sent royal forces to suppress it. Before it really gets off the ground too much, he ends up dying, and many of his supporters actually get executed. Now, so what were some of the other details? It's not clear that he was really anything other than an opportunist that was fighting for power against other elites in Jamestown. But what's clear is that he was able to utilize their discontent. Okay, and I mean, let's look at presidential potential nominees right now in politics. Bernie Sanders on one side, or Hillary Clinton. Actually, a better example would be Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. They both want to talk as if they're for the common American, and they're obviously elites themselves. And so, so in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, we often are really talking about elites versus elites, and then those of us that they're speaking in the name of, right? Okay. That's kind of really what we see happening at this point. Now, what are some of the issues, though, taking place that are significant? Basically, one has to do with the fact that the local elites, they're content to do trade with some of the Native Americans. In other words, the status quo is good for them. They have established themselves well, and you have many poor folks that, if they want to get property or expand, they feel the need to go outside of the town. And what ultimately happens is they come in conflict with the native Indians there. And part of that creates problem for the local elites, because local elites would rather just trade with those people, and yet some members of Jamestown are in direct conflict with them. We have a conflict of interests. And ultimately what we're seeing is that poor whites, and actually some poor blacks, they see their chance of being, breaking out and being free is to expand into the territory and fight the Native Americans, as they call Indians. Okay, as Bacon says, we must defend ourselves against all Indians in general, for that they were all enemies. But again, that's not how the elites saw it. And what ends up happening is, in order to get power, he kind of utilizes this discontent of the poor whites and the poor blacks to lead a rebellion against the elites, seeing them that basically that the elites don't care about their own interests. Okay, and of course, the irony is also who cares about the Native American people's interests? Well, nobody really in this case. Okay, and so we have layers upon layers of discussion that we could go on this. Now, let me just clarify something about this when we talk about poor whites and poor blacks. There was what's called indentured servitude. Essentially, you had white slaves. They, though, had a contract that after a certain amount of time they could be free. But let's make it clear, they were slaves. Many blacks were put in the same position. For poor whites and poor blacks, they were able to unite under the same cause, as this picture you see here depicting accurately. And after losing this, many historians took note that elites took note that these poor slave conditioned people were able to unite and attack the elites, and to the point that they needed backup. And it's believed that this rebellion is going to be the beginning. Maybe we shouldn't just say that this is directly the cause of going into color-based or race-based slavery, but it's certainly one of those events that is going to push towards the weeding out of white slavery mixed with black slavery, and we're going to see a shift into strictly using blacks as slaves. Now, this is an important topic that I want to kind of address that I've already did a little bit. And this is where, me being a world historian, my opinion is that to understand U.S. history, you also have to understand it in context to other histories. And when it comes to the issue of slavery, we should be clear. Not only was slavery common, white-on-white slavery in the British Isles, all of Europe had slavery and had white slaves. In Africa, blacks had black slaves. And this was just the way things were in the world for the most part. Now, occasionally you did have a mixing of different ethnicities brought in, but ultimately slavery was not based on someone's race or color in the world. And you see, one of the things that I want to address to you as well is that you can't just say one form of slavery fits all other forms. Okay, I'm reading right now some Icelandic sagas from the Middle Ages, and you had the story of a Norwegian Viking who goes to the market and he wants to buy a concubine, a sex slave. And he goes in the market, and these are white women, okay, that are captured on the British Isles. He says that he wants to buy this one particular girl, and the owner says, look, I got to be honest, she's mute. She can't talk. And of course, you don't buy a sex slave because you care about someone's conversation or feelings. Apparently, so he bought her anyways. So it says that he has sex with her, meaning raped, because it wasn't her choice, right? And then she has a baby. And this baby becomes Olaf the Peacock. Now, by the way, you're going to think I'm going way off topic. This is all going to make sense and come back to the topic, okay? So, Olaf the Peacock is an important character and one of the founders of Iceland. And later, his dad finds out that she's not mute, that she can talk. And she's Irish, and she claims to be basically a princess of an Irish king. And this impresses his father. And later, she teaches him Irish, and he goes back to Ireland in the story to meet his kingly grandfather. And he comes back to Iceland very honored to be not only of a highbrow father from Norway, but to also be a descendant of a king from Ireland. And his mother gets a big farm and eventually married off and lives a relatively normal life. And we see other cases like this. What's my point? My point is that slavery in Europe under that context, just like indentured servants here, wasn't fatalistic. And it wasn't race-based. He could be proud of being an Irish if he comes from a certain bloodline and so on. Okay, and in that case, you look at somebody, you don't necessarily think, oh, that person is a slave or of slave, coming from slavery. So what's different about the legacy of slavery in the United States is really important. It's that right away you could see somebody that was of black skin, and that was associated with slavery, nothing else. They might have even had a few that could buy their freedom, but that ends up becoming what is a symbol of slavery. And I think that that's really significantly different than the forms of slavery that we see in the Islamic world, in Africa, and even in European world. It was more fatalistic, okay? And I think as we go off in this class and we explore more the nature of slavery, I think it makes, it really is unique. And I mention this. This is not something I necessarily see from a lot of historians, that America is the first place that you really invent the white person. So in other words, people in Europe have been treating each other bad and having racist view towards each other, not based on being white. Hitler was killing Jews, and he had to discover if they were Jewish. Why? Many of them looked German. Let's think about that. They spoke German, and sometimes he had to find out, people would investigate. Is that person really German? They had to wear yellow badges because no one would just necessarily look at them and know for sure if they're Jewish. Okay? So whites didn't all just get along because they were white in Europe. But you come to the United States, and yes, there's going to be a conflict later on with Catholics, and there's going to be racism towards Irish Catholics. But ultimately, you speak English properly, and you kind of establish yourself here, and you become white as opposed to black, right? And we create this contrast that we still see conflicting today in a way that I'd argue that you don't see in other parts of the world. So that's just my kind of thought on that, and why I wanted to emphasize a discussion about this conflict. Now, in Howard Zinn's book and in the textbook, and if you want on your own, you can find more of the fine details of Bacon's Rebellion, which I didn't go into. What I really want you to come away from is what is part of the significance of it on impacting us now, and that's where I'm going to leave it at this moment.